At 53, Ben Affleck no longer runs from the most important question of his life. Why does he love so fiercely, yet never manage to hold on to happiness? Behind Hollywood's blinding spotlight stands a man exhausted by love, worn down by addiction, and haunted by a lifelong fear of abandonment, one that has followed him through every success, every failure, and every heartbreak. Before the fame, before the applause, before the name Ben Affleck became a brand echoed across Hollywood, there was a boy who wanted only one thing: to be loved. Not admired. Not envied. Loved in a way that felt safe. As a teenager, Ben carried an intensity that did not come from confidence, but from hunger. A quiet hunger rooted deep inside him. He grew up learning early that affection could disappear, that emotional safety was fragile, that connection was something you clung to before it slipped away. Even then, long before cameras followed him, Ben was not searching for success. He was searching for shelter. That shelter arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, in the form of Cheyenne Rothman. She was not famous. She was not dazzling. She did not belong to the world Ben would later enter. And that was precisely why she mattered so much. With her, love felt simple. Ordinary. Untouched by ambition or judgment. For many years, they grew side by side, through adolescence and into early adulthood, building a bond that felt steady, predictable, real. For Ben, that relationship became more than romance. It became his emotional home. With Cheyenne, he was not performing. He was not proving anything. He could be uncertain, awkward, unfinished. She knew the version of him that existed before the world demanded answers. And in that space, he felt whole. Those years remained the calmest chapter of his life. But time does not freeze for first love. As Ben's ambition sharpened, as auditions multiplied and the pull of Hollywood grew stronger, distance crept in slowly, quietly, almost politely. Different paths. Different rhythms. Different futures forming beneath the surface. There were fewer shared days, more unanswered silences. Love remained, but it no longer moved forward at the same speed. The breaking point did not arrive with betrayal or shouting. It arrived with clarity. In the year 1997, Ben chose his career. Not because he loved her less, but because the world ahead of him was louder than the peace behind him. That decision did not feel heroic. It felt necessary. And devastating. When they separated, there were no public scenes, no dramatic closure. Just the understanding that something precious had ended before it was ready. That quiet ending left a mark. The relationship did not collapse. It faded. And in fading, it created a hollow space inside Ben that would never fully close. His first love became the standard by which every future connection would be measured, whether he realized it or not. She was the reference point for safety. For calm. For being chosen without conditions. From that moment on, Ben began carrying a fear he rarely spoke about. The fear of being left behind. Every relationship after would echo that loss. Every attachment would feel urgent. Every love would carry the anxiety of disappearance. He did not chase women. He chased the feeling he lost when he walked away from the one place that felt like home. Years later, standing at his first major film premiere, cameras flashing violently around him, Ben would feel it again. That split. One part of him pulled toward the future. Another part permanently anchored to a quieter past. The lights did not just illuminate his face. They pulled him further away from the boy he once was. And in that moment, something inside him learned a dangerous lesson. That success often requires sacrifice. And that love, even when pure, is not always chosen. That belief would follow him for the rest of his life. When Ben Affleck stepped fully into Hollywood, the world did not simply open its doors to him. It swallowed him whole. Fame arrived fast, loud, and intoxicating. Applause followed him into rooms where champagne flowed freely and nights dissolved into mornings without consequence. Success wrapped itself around his shoulders like a heavy coat. From the outside, it looked like everything a young man could ever want. But inside, something fragile was already beginning to crack. It was during this ascent that Gwyneth Paltrow entered his life. She was luminous in a way Hollywood admired. Intelligent, composed, admired for both talent and restraint. When they met, their connection felt effortless, almost cinematic. Two rising stars finding each other in a city built on illusion. To Ben, she seemed like proof that he could belong in this world without losing himself entirely. Their relationship unfolded beneath flashing lights and whispered envy. Red carpets. Film sets. Private jokes shared in public spaces. For a while, it felt like balance. Like love could anchor him amid the chaos. But Hollywood is not gentle with imperfections. It magnifies them. The more successful Ben became, the louder his inner noise grew. Pressure crept in through every corner. Expectations. Comparisons. The unspoken demand to always be more confident, more controlled, more invincible than he felt. Love, instead of grounding him, became another place to hide. He did not lean into himself. He escaped himself. Alcohol softened the edges of anxiety. Gambling offered brief moments of control in a life that felt increasingly unmanageable. Nights blurred together, not out of joy, but out of avoidance. The applause faded faster each time, leaving behind an emptiness no amount of attention could fill. With Gwyneth, there was no cruelty. No betrayal. Only distance slowly widening between two people who wanted different things from life. She sought clarity. Stability. Growth. Ben was still running from a version of himself he did not know how to face. Their breakups were quiet. Their reunions hesitant. Each return carried less certainty than the last. And eventually, they let go without anger, without scandal, without a villain to blame. When she walked away, Ben did not feel rage. He felt hollow. He had loved her. But love had not saved him. After the relationship ended, Ben threw himself deeper into work, believing motion could drown out reflection. Instead, the industry turned on him with startling speed. The release of Geely became a public humiliation, dissected and mocked without mercy. Critics were ruthless. Audiences unforgiving. For Ben, it was more than a professional failure. It was a collapse of identity. The same world that had lifted him now stripped him bare. Confidence evaporated. Self-doubt rushed in. He began to internalize the judgment, confusing rejection of his work with rejection of himself. The shame settled deep, feeding the belief that he was fundamentally flawed. Hollywood did not break him because it was cruel. It broke him because it reflected his weaknesses back at him without compassion. And in that reflection, Ben saw a man who could succeed loudly but love quietly. A man who chased connection yet feared stillness. A man who believed affection could rescue him, while refusing to confront the wounds driving him forward. When the noise faded, when the parties ended, when the relationship was gone, what remained was silence. And in that silence, Ben Affleck was left alone with the truth he had been avoiding. Love cannot save someone who is still running from himself. When Ben Affleck met Jennifer Garner, something unfamiliar happened inside him. For the first time in years, the noise softened. She did not enter his life like a storm. She arrived quietly. Gently. With a steadiness that felt almost foreign to a man accustomed to chaos. Jennifer was not dazzled by fame. She did not chase attention or thrive in excess. She listened. She noticed. She stayed present. And to Ben, that presence felt like safety. With her, life slowed down. What grew between them was not explosive passion, but something far more dangerous to a wounded man. Peace. The kind of peace Ben had never known growing up. The kind that felt warm, reliable, almost unreal. Jennifer became more than a partner. She became a home. The home he never truly had. Marriage followed. Then children. And with them, a version of Ben he desperately wanted to believe in. A father who would show up. A husband who would protect. A man who would break the cycle that haunted his childhood. Holding his children in his arms, he made a vow without witnesses. He would not become his father. He would not let alcohol steal him away. For a time, that promise felt possible. Family grounded him. Mornings were filled with small routines. Evenings with quiet laughter. In those moments, Ben looked like a man who had finally outrun his demons. But addiction does not disappear because life becomes beautiful. Sometimes, it returns precisely because there is something precious to lose. Alcohol crept back in quietly. Disguised as exhaustion. As celebration. as relief after long days. Each relapse carried shame. Each recovery carried hope. Jennifer saw it all. The effort. The fear. The guilt etched into his face when he tried to hide what she already knew. She did not yell. She did not abandon him. She stood beside him. She drove him to treatment. She held his hand when he was at his weakest. She shielded the children from the worst of it. And through every cycle of falling and standing again, she believed love could be enough. That patience could heal what pain had carved deep inside him. But addiction does not negotiate with love. The more Jennifer tried to save him, the more Ben retreated into himself. Not because he did not care, but because he hated the version of himself she kept rescuing. He felt unworthy of the life they built. Unworthy of her faith. And that feeling fed the very darkness he was trying to escape. Years passed like this. Hope rising. Then breaking. Again and again. Until love became heavy. Until care turned into quiet exhaustion. They did not fight loudly. They unraveled slowly. Two people sitting next to each other, feeling further apart each day. When the marriage ended, there was no scandal. No public war. Only grief. After more than a decade together, they chose separation. Not because love had died, but because it had reached its limit. Ben would later call it the greatest failure of his life. Not as a headline. As a confession. He had lost the one place that ever truly felt like home. The end of that marriage shattered something inside him. Jennifer had given him stability, family, forgiveness, and time. And still, it had not been enough to defeat the shadows rooted long before she arrived. That realization was devastating. Because it meant the truth Ben had avoided for years could no longer be denied. You can love deeply. You can be loved completely. And still not be healed. Jennifer Garner had been his sanctuary. But even sanctuaries cannot cure wounds that refuse to be faced. When she walked away, Ben did not just lose a wife. He lost the version of himself he had hoped to become. And what remained was a man forced to confront the hardest truth of all. Love can offer shelter. But it cannot save someone who has not yet learned how to save himself. PHN 4, VBBIVEM and SSPCA Hein NH and GCHA, is almost equal to 450 to 500 T, truck NOI dung Christine Uzunian Trianthong, hin on rieng tu by fan fui hon tat ly han truck tom ly ben doi dien fin ban min so not, nuoi cha vang mat za ho, to get ban nan, tram kam sao kong ket toi, kong bien min chi la mot nuoi dan ong de gay qua lao. Part 4, The Nanny Scandal and the Collapse of a Father's Image. The moment Ben Affleck feared the most did not arrive in private. It arrived in public. Her name was Christine Uzunian. Until then, she had existed quietly on the edges of a famous household. A caretaker. A background presence. Someone invisible to the world. And then, suddenly, she was everywhere. Photographs surfaced. Intimate enough to ignite suspicion. Ambiguous enough to invite judgment. The media did what it always does best. It simplified a complex human fracture into a single headline. The story spread faster than truth ever could, tearing through private lives with mechanical precision. For Ben Affleck, there was no escape. Cameras hunted him. Commentators dissected his character. Strangers decided who he was, who he had become, and what kind of man he deserved to be remembered as. The narrative was brutal, efficient, and merciless. Husband who failed. Father who betrayed. Men who could not be trusted. But the deepest damage was not public. It was internal. Ben was forced to confront the image he had spent his entire life trying to outrun. The absent father. The broken man. The one who chooses escape over responsibility. The one whose weaknesses leave scars on the people he loves most. Shame settled into his bones. He did not scream his innocence. He did not defend himself loudly. He withdrew. There was self-hatred in his silence. A quiet disgust at seeing his children's names dragged into conversations they never chose. At realizing that his private failures had now become their public inheritance. The fear that haunted him as a child had materialized in real time. He had become the man he swore he would never be. When the divorce was finalized, it happened without spectacle. Just signatures. Just paperwork. Just the formal end of a life that once held promise. Sitting alone afterward, Ben felt something collapse completely. Not anger. Not relief. But a hollow finality. The marriage was over. The family was fractured. And the blame felt impossible to escape. Depression followed like a shadow that refused to loosen its grip. Days blurred together. Nights stretched endlessly. In quiet rooms filled with reminders of laughter that no longer lived there, Ben confronted a version of himself he did not recognize. A man stripped of excuses. Stripped of denial. This was not a story about villains or victims. It was not about innocence or guilt. It was about a man who had been breaking for a very long time, finally shattering under the weight of exposure. Christine became a symbol the world could point to, but the truth was far more uncomfortable. The damage did not begin with her. And it would not end with her disappearance from the headlines. What remained was a father trying to understand how deeply he had failed. How pain passed down through generations does not vanish simply because someone wants to be better. And how love, when tangled with addiction and shame, can leave behind wreckage without intention. There were no winners in this chapter. Only people wounded by a collapse that had been building quietly for years. And at the center of it all stood Ben Affleck, not as a star, not as a scandal, but as a man finally forced to look at the cost of the life he had been running from. When the world slowed to a standstill, Ben Affleck met Ana de Armas. It did not happen in a glamorous place. There were no red carpets. No crowded rooms filled with noise. Their connection formed quietly, on a film set shadowed by uncertainty, just before the world closed its doors. Outside, cities emptied. Inside, something fragile began to open. For Ben, this timing mattered more than he understood at first. Life had finally slowed enough for him to feel again without being overwhelmed. During lockdown, the pace of his existence changed completely. There were no premieres to attend, no expectations to perform, no roles to play beyond simply being present. Days blurred into each other gently. Walks in empty streets. Shared meals. Long conversations without interruption. For a man who had spent decades running, this stillness felt like medicine. Ana brought light without pressure. She did not try to fix him. She did not demand transformation. She laughed easily. She moved softly through his life, leaving space where others had filled it with noise. With her, Ben rediscovered a version of himself that was not defined by regret or public failure. Just a man learning how to breathe again. For the first time in a long while, happiness did not feel heavy. Their relationship existed outside the usual machinery of fame. No constant cameras. No relentless commentary. Just moments that felt private, almost sacred. Ben watched Ana interact with his children, gentle and respectful, and something inside him tightened. Not with fear, but with cautious hope. Still, beneath that calm, anxiety waited. Ben did not fear losing Ana. He feared the future. He feared what would happen when the world reopened. When schedules returned. When expectations crept back in. He feared dragging her into a life shaped by scars she did not create. And more than anything, he feared promising something he was not certain he could sustain. The relationship was never poisoned by betrayal. There were no dramatic accusations. No scandals. No explosions. Instead, it ended the way some beautiful things do. Quietly. With sadness. With understanding. When they parted ways, the pain was subtle but deep. The kind that lingers long after voices fall silent. Ben did not rage against the loss. He mourned it gently. Ana became a memory untouched by bitterness. A reminder that love could exist without destroying him. She represented what might have been. Not a mistake. Not a regret. Just a chapter that arrived at the wrong moment in a life still recovering. In the quiet after their separation, Ben often returned to those slow days in his mind. The laughter. The calm mornings. The absence of chaos. He wondered if he had been brave enough. Or if fear had once again made the decision for him. But deep down, he understood something important. Ana de Armas had not come into his life to stay forever. She came to show him that gentleness was still possible. That love did not always have to hurt. That he was capable of being present, kind, and whole, even if only for a season. Some loves leave wounds. Others leave clarity. And Anna was the latter. Some loves never truly end. They wait. For Ben Affleck, Jennifer Lopez was not just a former lover. She was a question left unanswered for decades. A feeling paused in time. A story interrupted before it could reach its ending. When they found their way back to each other, it felt less like coincidence and more like destiny demanding one final attempt. Messages turned into conversations. Conversations reopened memories. And memories, long buried, returned with startling clarity. For Ben, it felt like reclaiming a part of himself he had lost long ago. Their reunion was tender, almost reverent. Older. Wiser. Softer. The chaos that once surrounded them seemed distant, as if the world had matured alongside them. When they married, it was not impulsive passion. It was a declaration. A belief that timing had finally aligned. But time does not change who people are at their core. Jennifer lived in light. She breathed in attention, transformed visibility into power, and turned personal history into art. For her, sharing love with the world was an act of pride. A celebration. For Ben, love had always been something fragile, something he protected by hiding it. At first, he tried to adapt. He showed up. He smiled. He stood beside her under flashing cameras, convincing himself that exposure was the price of love. But each public appearance took something from him. Each shared detail chipped away at the quiet he needed to survive. The more visible their relationship became, the smaller he felt inside it. When Jennifer decided to tell their story again, through a documentary, through music, through letters written in moments of raw vulnerability, Ben felt a familiar fear tighten around his chest. Those letters had been written in darkness. In pain. In private. Seeing them prepared for the world reopened wounds he had never fully closed. He asked for restraint. For silence. For boundaries. Jennifer tried to understand, but to her, love had never existed without expression. She was not trying to hurt him. She was being herself. And that was the tragedy. Ben was not being betrayed by her actions. He was being confronted by his own limitations. They loved each other deeply. But they lived in different emotional climates. Ben needed stillness the way others need air. Jennifer needed movement, sound, connection. What nourished one slowly suffocated the other. They tried to compromise, but compromise cannot rewrite identity. As months passed, Ben felt himself disappearing. Not dramatically. Quietly. He smiled less. Spoke less. Retreated inward. Old habits whispered again, promising relief. The marriage did not explode. It eroded. By the time they chose to live apart, there was no anger left. Only exhaustion. When the divorce was finalized in the year 2024, the word that defined it was not betrayal. It was irreconcilable difference. In their final moments together, there were no accusations. No dramatic confessions. Just gratitude. Regret. And an understanding too heavy to put into words. Ben thanked her for coming back into his life. Jennifer admitted she did not regret loving him again. The most painful truth arrived afterward. Ben had known who Jennifer was long before they tried again. He had loved her brilliance, her fire, her openness. But he had convinced himself he could live inside that world. That love would be enough to override his need for quiet. That this time, he would be different. He was wrong. No one deceived anyone. No one betrayed anyone. Ben had deceived himself. He mistook endurance for compatibility. He believed sacrifice equaled devotion. But loving Jennifer Lopez required a version of himself that could live publicly, breathe loudly, and exist without retreat. And that version of him did not exist. When it ended, Ben did not feel rage. He felt clarity. A devastating kind of clarity. He finally understood that love, no matter how powerful, cannot survive when it demands self-erasure. Jennifer walked forward, luminous as ever. Ben stepped back into shadow. Not because he loved her less. but because loving her cost him himself. And that was a price he could no longer pay. After the marriage ended, Ben Affleck did not run. There was no dramatic reinvention. No public romance rushed into place. No loud declarations about healing. Instead, there was silence. And for the first time in his life, that silence did not terrify him. He returned to therapy quietly. Not as a performance. Not as a promise to anyone else. But as a necessity. Sessions were slow. Uncomfortable. Honest. He began to name the things he had spent decades avoiding. Shame. Fear. Loneliness. The need to disappear when life became too loud. Sobriety was no longer framed as redemption, but as survival. Some days were steady. Others were fragile. Alcohol still whispered, especially in moments of exhaustion. But now, Ben recognized the voice. He did not romanticize it. He did not invite it in. He chose restraint not because he was strong, but because he had finally learned what was at stake. His children became the center of gravity. Every decision passed through them. Time mattered more than ambition. Presence mattered more than image. He no longer chased the version of himself that looked impressive from a distance. He focused on being reliable up close. School mornings. Quiet dinners. Simple routines. These moments did not heal him overnight, but they anchored him to reality. Work returned, but differently. Ben chose projects that allowed space. Space to go home. Space to breathe. Space to remain human. The frantic hunger of his earlier years had softened into discernment. Success was no longer about proving worth. It was about sustainability. About choosing a life that did not require escape. He slowed down. And in slowing down, something unexpected happened. The noise inside him grew quieter. Not gone. Never gone. But manageable. He learned that peace was not a reward you earn after suffering enough. It was a practice. A daily decision to stop performing, to stop chasing intensity, to stop confusing chaos with passion. Love, he realized, had always been where he placed his hope for salvation. If he loved hard enough, if someone loved him completely, everything would make sense. But love had never been the problem. The weight he placed on it was. Now, he asked different questions. Can I be present without disappearing? Can I be honest without fear? Can I exist without becoming someone else for approval? These questions did not demand immediate answers. And for the first time, Ben was comfortable not rushing toward resolution. There is a quiet maturity in this chapter of his life. Not triumphant. Not tragic. Simply aware. He understands now that happiness does not live in extremes. It does not require grand romance or public validation. It lives in respect. In stability. In being allowed to remain oneself without apology. So the story does not end with a new love. It ends with a pause. A man sitting with himself, no longer running, no longer hiding, no longer demanding that love fix what only he can face. Whether Ben Affleck has learned how to love correctly remains unanswered. But perhaps that is not the right question anymore. Perhaps the real question is this. What if peace, at last, is the love he was searching for all along?